The lights in the conference room were too bright, cold, like they were trying to bleach the exhaustion right out of my bones. It was 2:17 a.m. in downtown Chicago. The city outside the floor-to-ceiling glass looked like a sea of frozen stars, but inside this room, it felt like I was drowning. I stood at the back, arms crossed tight against my chest, watching Victor Lang own the presentation like he had built the damn building with his own hands. On the massive screen behind him was my design. Every line, every structural solution, every late-night breakthrough that had cost me sleep, health, and pieces of my soul for the last 14 months. And he was calling it our vision. My team and I spent countless nights perfecting this, Victor said smoothly, flashing that confident smile that always closed deals. The innovative cantilever system? That was a group effort. Marcus here brought the key insight on the load distribution. Marcus Hale nodded slowly. My Marcus. The one who used to bring me coffee at 3 a.m. when I was still debugging the foundation math. The one I had taught how to read stress diagrams properly. He didn't even glance my way. Elena Torres sat beside him, young and ambitious, staring down at her notebook like it held the answers to the universe. The same Elena I had stayed until midnight with for weeks, shielding her from Victor's sharpest criticisms. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My hands started trembling. Not from anger. Not yet. From the weight of it all finally crashing down at once. I had given this project everything. My weekends, my holidays, the relationship that fell apart because I was never home, the migraines I ignored, the nights I cried in the bathroom because I couldn't get one particular joint detail to work. Until I did. And now, standing here in the back like a ghost in my own story, I realized the brutal truth. I wasn't part of the team. I was the invisible architect. The one who drew in silence so others could speak in spotlight. Victor kept talking, his voice full of pride. Every word felt like another brick being stacked on my chest. I could feel the familiar tightness in my throat, the burn behind my eyes. For one terrifying second, I thought I might actually break right there in front of all of them. But then, something shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the soft click of a lock finally turning. I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to raise my hand and say, actually, that was my idea. I didn't want to watch their awkward excuses or forced apologies. I was done carrying their dreams on my back while they took the credit and the bonuses. In that moment, under those merciless LED lights, I made the decision. I was going to leave. Not with shouting. Not with tears. Not with a dramatic resignation speech. Just leave. Let them discover what happens when the person who actually knew how to hold it all together simply stops holding. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Part of me was terrified. What if I was making the biggest mistake of my career? What if no one ever knew what I had really contributed? What if I walked away and regretted it for the rest of my life? But another part of me, the part that had been quietly breaking for years, finally felt relief. I slipped out of the conference room without a word. Back at my desk, the office was dark and empty. Only the glow of my monitor remained. I stared at the final version of the blueprint one last time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment. Then I did the only thing that felt right. I saved the file, shut down the computer, and left the building. Outside, Chicago rain was pouring hard, cold drops hitting my face like tiny needles. I didn't open my umbrella. I just stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, letting the water soak through my coat, washing away 14 months of invisible labor. As I walked away from the glittering tower behind me, I whispered into the night, sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud at all. It's simply stepping back and letting them try to stand on their own. The rain had finally stopped by the time I sent the email. Subject line: resignation. Effective immediately. No explanation. No farewell paragraph. Just my name at the bottom. I hit send at 6:42 a.m., closed my laptop, and never looked back. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the quiet edge of Oak Park. The walls were plain white. The windows overlooked a little courtyard with old maple trees. No glass towers. No LED lights buzzing at 2 a.m. Just silence and space to breathe. For the first few days, I barely left the couch. I kept replaying that night in the conference room. Victor's confident voice, Marcus nodding like he deserved the praise, Elena looking away. Each memory landed like a stone in my stomach. Sometimes I would wake up at night with my heart racing, wondering if I had thrown away 14 months of my life for nothing. But slowly, something began to change. I bought a cheap sketchbook and started drawing again. Not for clients, not for deadlines. Just for me. Lines flowed easier than they had in years. I planted lavender and basil on the tiny balcony. In the evenings, I sat outside with a cup of tea, watching the leaves move in the wind, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally begin to loosen. There were still moments of doubt. Late at night, I would think about the cantilever system, the way the light was supposed to fall through the atrium at golden hour. I wondered if they were getting it right. A quiet fear would creep in. What if the building I had poured my soul into ended up wrong? I pushed the thought away. This time, it wasn't my job to fix everything. Back at the old office, things were moving forward. Or so they said. Victor had taken full ownership of the project. He walked the halls with even more swagger, telling everyone the design was locked in and on schedule. Marcus was promoted to lead architect on the execution phase. Elena was assigned to coordinate with the structural engineers. I only knew these things because old colleagues still had my number. Then the messages started. The first one came from Elena at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Lyla, the load calculations on level 7 aren't matching the new revisions. Did we miss something before you left? I can't find the original notes. I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could almost hear her voice nervous, a little desperate. The same tone she used when Victor used to criticize her work in front of the team. I didn't reply. 2 days later, another message. This one from Marcus. Hey, quick question on the facade connection details. The contractors are saying the tolerances are off. Any chance you kept a backup file? I read it twice. Then I turned my phone face down and went back to watering my plants. The relief I felt was strange. Not triumphant, just quiet. Like setting down a heavy bag I had been carrying for years without realizing how much it weighed. But the worry was still there, flickering in the background like a distant storm. I kept imagining the building. My building. The one I had fought for. What if my absence created problems no one could solve? What if people got hurt because of mistakes that could have been avoided? I reminded myself again and again I had given them everything. More than enough. Now it was their turn to stand on their own. Then, one crisp October morning, my inbox pinged with something unexpected. A small boutique developer in Evanston had seen my freelance portfolio. They wanted me to design a community arts center. Nothing massive. But the budget was real. The creative freedom was real. And for the first time in years, the client wanted my name on the front page. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the offer, feeling something warm bloom in my chest. Hope. Real hope. At the exact same moment, 30 miles away in the glass tower downtown, the conference room lights were on again. This time at 9 a.m. Victor had called an emergency meeting. Word spread quickly through the old group chats I had long since muted. There was a serious issue with the core structural drawings. The kind of problem that couldn't be fixed with a weekend of overtime. The kind of problem that made everyone suddenly very quiet. I closed my laptop gently and walked to the balcony. The maple trees were turning gold. For the first time since I left, I took a deep breath that actually reached the bottom of my lungs. 3 months had passed since I left the glass tower behind. Winter had settled over Chicago like a heavy gray blanket. My little apartment in Oak Park felt warmer now, filled with the soft scent of lavender from the balcony and the quiet scratch of my pencil across fresh paper. I was sitting at the kitchen table one snowy afternoon when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend in the industry, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. You might want to hear this. The Meridian Center project is in serious trouble. I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart didn't race with excitement. It didn't fill with bitter satisfaction either. Instead, a slow, heavy ache settled deep in my chest. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Snow was falling silently outside, covering the courtyard in soft white. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing in the quiet. The Meridian Center. My cantilevered atrium, my carefully calculated load paths, my obsession with how natural light would move through the space at different hours of the day, all of it was cracking. From what my friend quietly shared, the structural calculations were off in critical areas. 2 major contractors had already pulled out. And Dr. Harlan Reed, the respected investor whose name carried real weight, had started asking very direct, very uncomfortable questions in the boardroom. I could picture it so clearly. Victor Lang, Once so confident, now pacing the conference room with sweat on his forehead, voice rising as he tried to shift blame. Marcus sitting there, pale, desperately flipping through old drawings, attempting to recreate solutions he had never truly understood. Elena. Poor Elena, probably shrinking in her chair, fighting back tears while the pressure crushed her from all sides. I closed my eyes. A wave of sorrow washed over me. Not for them. Not exactly. For the building itself. For all the nights I had stayed late perfecting every detail so it would stand strong and beautiful for decades. For the dream I had poured into those lines and numbers. Now it was suffering because the people who claimed it as theirs didn't know how to care for it. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my sketchbook again. I waited for the anger to come. The "I told you so" that should have felt sweet. But it never arrived. Instead, I felt something deeper. A quiet, aching clarity. I had not been crazy. I had not exaggerated my own importance. My work had real value. The kind of value that becomes painfully obvious the moment it's gone. And yet, I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to rescue them. I didn't want to be the hero who swoops in to fix what they broke. That realization hit me harder than any anger could have. It was a strange mix of grief and freedom, like watching a ship you once loved slowly take on water while standing safely on the shore, knowing you no longer had to go down with it. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat on the couch with Rue curled warm against my side. The cat had become my quiet companion, purring softly as if he understood the weight I was finally learning to set down. I opened a brand new sketchbook. Not for any client. Not for any deadline. This time, the paper was mine. I began drawing something entirely new. A small but soulful cultural center on the south side of the city. Clean lines, warm materials, spaces that invited people in instead of intimidating them. Every stroke carried my own voice, the one I had kept quiet for so many years while making others shine. There was fear, of course. What if no one wanted my vision? What if I failed on my own? But beneath the fear was something stronger. Something steady and alive. For the first time in years, I was designing without looking over my shoulder, without shrinking myself to make room for someone else's ego. As the snow continued to fall outside, I felt a subtle shift deep inside my chest. I wasn't just healing. I was beginning to build again this time, for myself. 6 months had slipped by since that snowy afternoon when I first opened a blank sketchbook for myself. Spring had returned to Chicago. The maple trees in my courtyard were bright green again, and my little cultural center project was slowly taking shape on paper, warm, honest, and entirely mine. I was standing at my drafting table one Tuesday morning, adjusting the angle of natural light in the main gallery space, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated, then answered. "Miss Voss? This is Dr. Harlan Reed." His voice was calm, measured, the kind that carried years of authority. I felt my pulse quicken slightly, but I kept my breathing steady. "I'd like to meet with you. In person, as soon as possible." He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. I knew. 2 days later, I walked into a quiet cafe in the Loop, the kind with worn leather chairs and the rich smell of fresh coffee. Dr. Reed was already waiting at a corner table. He stood when he saw me, tall, silver-haired, with sharp but kind eyes. We sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "I've reviewed the Meridian Center files thoroughly, and I need to hear the truth from the person who actually designed it." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug in front of me. Memories flashed: late nights, trembling hands, the feeling of being erased in that brightly lit conference room. But I didn't let them pull me under. I spoke quietly, honestly, not with anger, but with the steady weight of someone who had finally stopped carrying what wasn't hers. I told him how the core ideas had come together. The solutions that only made sense when you understood every layer of the foundation. The hundreds of small decisions that kept the building safe and beautiful at the same time. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply told the truth. Back in the glass tower, the emergency meeting Dr. Reed had demanded was already unfolding. Victor Lang stood at the head of the long table, face flushed, trying desperately to maintain control. He pointed fingers in every direction at the engineers, at the contractors, and finally at certain former team members who had left critical gaps on purpose. Marcus sat frozen in his chair. His hands were shaking as he stared at the revised drawings spread out before him. No matter how many times he tried to reconstruct the key connection details, the numbers wouldn't add up. The deeper he looked, the more he realized how much he had never truly understood. The panic in his eyes was raw and unmistakable. Elena sat across from him, pale and trembling. The pressure had been building for weeks. When Victor turned on her again, accusing her of sloppy coordination, something inside her finally broke. She stood up slowly, voice cracking but clear. None of this is working because most of the core concepts weren't ours. The room went deathly silent. Elena's eyes filled with tears as she continued. Lyla Voss created the foundational ideas, the cantilever system, the load distribution solutions. Almost everything that made the design special came from her. I stayed quiet because I was scared. Scared of losing my job. Scared of Victor. I'm sorry. Victor's face twisted. He slammed his hand on the table, voice rising sharply. That's ridiculous. She was just support staff. But Dr. Reed's calm voice cut through the chaos like cold steel. Enough. He looked directly at Victor, then at Marcus, then at the rest of the shaken team. I have spoken with Miss Voss. The independent review confirms what she shared. This project, as it currently stands, is fundamentally compromised. Victor lost control completely. His usual smooth confidence shattered in front of everyone. He began arguing, blaming, raising his voice until it cracked with desperation. Marcus simply stared at the table, shoulders slumped, the weight of his own silence crushing him. Elena sat back down, tears slipping down her cheeks. But there was a strange kind of relief in her eyes, too. Meanwhile, across town in that quiet cafe, Dr. Reed looked at me with new respect. Miss Voss, he said slowly, I'm making a decision today. The Meridian Center project will be temporarily halted. The current team will step back, and I would like you to lead the independent evaluation and potentially redesign from the ground up. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with the overwhelming realization of what this meant. This wasn't revenge. This was truth finally finding its way into the light. I took a slow breath, looked Dr. Reed in the eyes, and answered with quiet strength. 1 year later, the wind carried the faint smell of fresh concrete and spring blossoms across the future site of the Meridian Center. I stood on the edge of the construction platform, hard hat resting lightly in my hands. Below me, the ground had been cleared, and the first foundation pillars were already rising from the earth. On the temporary wall beside me hung the new master blueprint, my blueprint. This time, the name on the title block read, Lyla Voss Studio. Dr. Harlan Reed had made his decision clear. He wanted to work directly with me. No layers, no intermediaries, just honest collaboration with someone who had proven both talent and integrity. The old company had been forced to step back completely. Victor Lang was no longer part of the project. Internal reviews had begun, and the once confident man now moved through the industry with noticeably quieter footsteps. I heard he spent most days behind closed doors, answering difficult questions he could no longer deflect. Marcus had chosen silence. One morning, he simply submitted his resignation and left without goodbyes. I imagined him packing his things late at night, the weight of everything he had chosen not to say finally too heavy to carry any longer. Elena sent me a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, her handwriting careful and slightly unsteady. She wrote about the fear that had kept her quiet for so long. She wrote about the moment she finally spoke up in that meeting, and how terrifying, yet freeing it had felt. She thanked me not for saving the project, but for showing her what real courage looked like. She said she was learning to stand taller now, even when it was hard. I read the letter twice, then folded it gently and placed it in the drawer of my desk. There was no anger left in me toward her, only a quiet understanding of how fear can make good people small. I looked out over the construction site again. The new design was stronger, warmer, and more human than the original version. It carried my fingerprints in every thoughtful detail, the way light would fall across the public plaza, the intimate gathering spaces, the subtle elegance that respected both the city and the people who would walk through it. There was no rush of triumph in my chest, no urge to celebrate someone else's downfall. Instead, I felt a deep, steady peace. It was mixed with a gentle sadness, the kind you feel when you watch people you once worked beside lose pieces of themselves they may never get back. They had chosen comfort over truth, recognition over responsibility, and now they were living with the quiet consequences. I turned away from the site and drove back to my small studio on the edge of the city. The late afternoon sun poured through the large windows as I stepped inside. Rue was curled up on my drafting table, sleeping peacefully among scattered pencils and half-finished sketches. His orange fur glowed warm in the golden light. I set my bag down softly and walked to the window. Chicago stretched out before me, the skyline I had once served from the shadows, now looking different somehow. Smaller. Less intimidating. I thought about the woman I had been that night in the cold conference room. The one who had trembled with exhaustion and invisible pain. The one who had finally chosen to walk away instead of begging to be seen. She had been right to leave, because in letting go, I had found something far more valuable than any title or credit. I had found myself. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, I smiled quietly. Not a victorious smile. A real one. Calm, whole. This story is about more than justice served in a boardroom. It's about the quiet truth that your worth was never dependent on other people's recognition. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop holding up a world that refuses to see you and start building one that does. Because the work you do with love and honesty never truly disappears. It waits. It waits until you are ready to claim it. And when you finally do, the world has no choice but to step back and make space for the light that was always yours. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you truly. Aviso Legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.